Hello everyone, Sprocket Simulations here again with another tutorial on the Beechcraft D18 or Model 18. I think some people call it the Twin 18. But previously we did how to use the autopilot. Today we're going to do the complete opposite of doing a flight not using the autopilot. So we're back at Santa Barbra. We'll go ahead and jump on into the cockpit. We are already fired up, ready to go. There's one thing that I want to point out before we actually get rolling here, is if you start cold and dark and you go through your startup procedures and taxi on out, before you take off, just make sure that your elevator trim tab is about 3 degrees up. If you don't, it's going to be super heavy to try and take off, and you're going to be pulling really far back on your controls in order to get it in the air. You do not have flaps down for a normal procedure takeoff in this plane. So, saying that, we'll go ahead and come back to our main view here. Tail draggers are tricky. Big tail draggers are even trickier. I kind of went over this in the video last time of how you kind of have to like dance on the rudder pedals. Just be smooth. Do not, you can get into this sort of like counter steering. Like think about driving on snow or icy roads, that if you turn too much to correct like a slide, then all of a sudden you're going to be going back the other direction, and you do this sort of horizontal yo-yo effect. And that's when the wings start dipping, that's when things start going awry, that's when you start going off the runway. All of that sort of stuff happens. So just remember, be smooth and have nice small inputs in order to have a nice coordinated takeoff. It is hard. It takes some practice, but we are flying with live weather here at Santa Barbara. We're just going to head down the coast to Camarillo. It's a little hazy, so hopefully we can spot Camarillo pretty easily. I'm probably, just for the sake of making this a little easier on myself, I am just going to put in, so I at least have a visual representation of where we are going. If I go direct to, and we are going to I think CMA. The MA, and so if we just do direct and activate that, like I said, we're not going to use autopilot, but this just gives me a nice sort of visual to know when we're getting close and that type of stuff, which, you know, really we're just going to be flying the coast, but it is easy out. So you can see we do have about a 4-knot crosswind coming from pretty much the south. So that also comes into play with this aircraft when taking off, because crosswinds can really mess with, one, that tail as it picks up, and two, a lot of times you'll see that these wings will, you know, really start to dip in or raise. It is normal in any aircraft that if you have a crosswind, that you are going to be turning your ailerons to basically make sure that you stay level and coordinated during takeoff. It varies on how much you have to do based on how strong the crosswind is, but that is normal. It is more noticeable in this plane, one, because it's a tail dragger, it's a little bit less stable, and your rudder input is also going to start to affect that more as the wind is hitting it, as it's sort of wiggling and waggling. This aircraft also has a giant tail on it, so that you can imagine that small inputs on your trim can make great changes as far as trying to level this plane out, which a lot of people think that it there's a bug with the trim, which honestly I don't think there is. I just think it's a sensitive aircraft. I haven't flown the real thing, but looking at the design of this with two huge trim tabs on the back, a giant elevator, and then the position of the rudders, I think that it is going to be super sensitive to get coordinated once you're in the air. So let's go ahead and hop back into the cockpit, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can get a nice smooth takeoff here. So I'm going to come on down and pop our parking brake off, and then I'm going to get my view back to where I want it to be here. There we go. We're going to get our throttle full, props are full, mixture are full. So everything is pushed forward. We're going full throttle, and then we're just going to try and have a nice smooth takeoff. And that's what I always think about in this plane, is just like, okay, just the smallest of inputs to try and stay on that center line. Here comes that tail. Nice and smooth, and we can go ahead and rotate. So you can see that when I'm going to go ahead and bring our gear up, that once that tail comes up, it almost has a moment of like, oof, it's coming over on me. Don't automatically think that it's going to need a lot of correction. It just needs a small amount. So for power settings for our climb, you want to reduce down to roughly 2100 RPMs here, and then you're going to bring back your manifold pressure down to about 33 or so, and then I aim to, once you're clear of obstacles, sort of level out. I'm looking at my vertical speed indicator here. I like to climb right around like 1200, no more than 1500, just to have a nice coordinated climb here. So we're going to go up to 4,000 feet and level off. And once we're there, we'll go and set our cruise settings. So this is something else that I think a lot of people forget to do, is you need to just acknowledge that.
Santa Barbra Tower November, Sierra Papa Romeo Kilo, Tango frequency change.
So a lot of people will still, they just sort of give it the beans and then try and level off and want to get as much speed out of the plane as they can. It's going to be way too sensitive if you're doing that. Planes aren't designed to be at, their max in the yellow arc there. That's gonna make it just so twitchy. It's gonna feel basically out of control a little bit. Cruise on this is about 150 knots. So typically I set that for about 2,000 RPMs and about 26 inches of manifold pressure. Once you get into your cruise, you're going to come down and also close your cowl flaps. And then you can start to really set your trim to fly straight and level. So we're coming up now to 4,700. I'm going to go ahead and slowly start to back off on our throttle, and then also back off on our RPMs and bring that down to right around 2,000. You can see that that was a nice gentle way to come into our altitude that we want to fly at. The speed's going to start to increase, and we're going to have to mess with that trim a little bit. We'll go ahead and close our cowl flaps. You can see our ground speed, we're at 142 knots. indicated we're looking at about a 125. I'm also going to lean out our mixture here. I'm looking down here at our EGT, and you want to get that to sort of peak, and then it will there, and then I just come back in a little bit. And that's what's called rich of peak. So doing that, we did get more performance out of the plane. You can see that my trim level then sort of came uncoordinated. It's essentially once I leaned out our mixture to the correct setting, we got a little bit more performance in our RPMs, which would then make us sort of climb a little bit there. So we're just gonna make small adjustments again, get us back down to our 4,000. Yeah, it does look really kind of hazy. We're just right around 6:05 local time PM. So a couple of pointers that if you're having a hard time with flying this plane manually, one thing, biggest tip I can say is small adjustments have big changes. The next thing is that make sure that you are actually configuring the aircraft for what you're doing. So if you're cruising, set it for cruise. If you're climbing, you know, set your climbing settings. If you don't, it's gonna be even more sensitive, and those small changes are going to be even, or sorry, small changes will have a even larger effect on like your trim, or if you're just do a little bit of nose down, all of a sudden it's just like, whoa, what is going on? This thing feels like a rocket ship all of a sudden. That's probably because you're going 170, 180 knots and you haven't set your cruise appropriately. You can see what I'm doing right now is actually called chasing the needle. And like I said, that's because it's a little sensitive. I'm looking at my vertical speed, and I keep on doing a little bit too much in one direction. Similar thing that was going on, like I was describing with the rudder, that you do a little bit too much, and then you then do too much the other direction, and you end up in this sort of yo-yo effect. And that's what's going on right now. I'm sort of not giving it my full attention and really kind of talking to you guys and looking at the scenery a little bit. The other thing I like about this aircraft is, so here's the thing. I want to address this really quick. I started to in my last video, but then I got captured onto the approach and ended up not finishing my sentence. Is that so? Coronado, who collaborated with Asobo in order to make this for, I can't remember what it's like the local legends or something like that of their aircraft that they're releasing every so often with like the world updates and things. So Coronado gets, I think, a bad rap for their flight models. I think that they are great. They also get a bad rap for sometimes their sound. People have said like this doesn't have good sound. I think it has fantastic sound. And one way that I like to hear it is by popping open the window and listen to that engine just thumping along. You can open up this one too. Hey, that sounds fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I can remember how to close it now. There we go. we go. I think that the sound of the gear coming down is appropriate. I think the flaps coming down has a nice, you know, they're slow. It's mechanical. It's just got this like noise to it. I think it's great. The flight model, like I said, I haven't flown this plane, but I can imagine it's not the most easiest plane to fly. It's from an era that, you know, there was not a lot of sort of assistance or even like the stability of a high-winged plane, or the technology that we've now is just sort of normal on aircraft was not built into these. So they're going to be tricky. It's not going to be like jumping into a, you know, a Bonanza or a 172, or, you know, even something high performance like a King Air. Those are built for ease of use and stability. This is, you know, a workhorse plane. It was used for all sorts of different sort of uses. So like it was used in the military, it was used for a cargo plane, it was actually used as an airliner, as a charter plane. I think it was even used in some sort of like rescue sort of configurations as well. You can use it as a bush plane, really. I mean, you don't need much runway in this thing, because you can drop that speed down to, you know, 75 knots, 60 knots, and then just plop it down on a field. So I'm gonna just follow this coastline out here. I'm gonna keep an eye out for Oxnard. We're gonna fly past that, because then that'll let us come in and do a left traffic pattern into Camarillo, which is gonna be somewhere over there. So we'll see how landing goes. Same as takeoff, it can be extremely tricky. I kind of went over this in my last video when I was landing, coming off of the RNAV, and in order to do a wheel landing, which is what you should be doing, don't do a three-wheel landing on this. It's not good for the plane. That tail wheel is not strong. It's really only used for soft field landings if you were, you know, super short, where you're going to stall the plane out and plop it down. So the way that I have found to do this with the greatest amount of success, sorry, I'm just going to zoom out here and see about, okay, is you're going to, you know, sort of slow it down as you come in. As you pass over the threshold, you want to be pretty, you know, pretty low, and then you're going to have back pressure on your yoke to try and keep it floating above that runway. You don't want to flare, you just want to float. So as you're floating, you're going to get to the point where the plane wants to drop. Right before it touches, let your controls come to neutral. So you want that back pressure to come off, and then it's just going to touch the wheels down and continue to ride out. If you keep your back pressure on, what you're going to do is drop the tail down. That's going to hit, you're going to bounce, or you're just going to keep that back pressure on, and it's going to bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce until finally it slows down enough for you to actually like have the tail come fully down and you stop bouncing, and by that time you're probably even off the runway because you weren't in control of the rudder. So we'll practice that coming in here. I need to go ahead and start my descent here, so I'm gonna go ahead and slow down. We're just passing over Oxnard right now, I believe. Yep, so there's Oxnard there. We're looking for Camarillo, which is right there. So we'll go ahead and start our descent and head on over. You know, I don't really fly in and out of Oxnard all that often. For some reason, I always come over to Camarillo. Alright, so I'm going to bring a little bit of throttle back in. And I think Camarillo is, you know, basically at sea level, maybe 50, 60 feet above sea level. So we're going to come in and do a downwind, enter on the downwind to do left traffic pattern and come in and land that way, which will, man, that wind picked up. So lucky it looks like it's going to be in the right direction. But currently we're at like 17 knots, so that's no joke. So we'll continue this nice kind of controlled descent. I'm gonna really kind of level off at around 1,200 feet. So we're you know, roughly 1,000 feet, rounding up above the surface of the runway. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more here so I can get a better visual. I'm going to clear out some of this stuff as well. So we're just passing 2,000 feet. I'm going to go ahead and bring our mixture full forward and also our props full forward for landing. We're also going to open up our cowl flaps again. So I'm just gonna try and follow this out, and then we're gonna make a nice gentle turn, come in and land. We'll see how bad that wind's gonna affect us though. That's what makes landing these tricky as well, is that if you have a decent amount of wind, it can really mess with you. But we will do our best. We will see how this goes. But you can see, really, I had no issues trimming out the plane. Just from my own sort of errors of me chasing that needle a little bit, where we were kind of bouncing around 100 foot up and down for just a moment. But then I got it under control and configured it, and we stayed at 4,000 feet and flew manually out here, and we're still flying manually, and we're just having a nice controlled descent. You know, we're roughly 300 feet per minute, something nice and kind of chill. So it's funny that we hit this outer marker here, which I think is actually the outer marker for Oxnard, because it's definitely not for Camarillo. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in a little bit of throttle to start to get us to stay around 1,200. And we're passing really what they call a beam the numbers right about now, so we can go ahead and I'm going to drop our landing gear. And really I'm going to fly out, just kind of getting a visual references here. I'm going to fly out here, obviously, before we get to that mountain, and start our turn onto base and then onto final, which we'll probably just do in one big gentle arc. Once I've got that under control, that's when we'll start. Really, we could pop down flaps now if we wanted to start slowing down, but I'm giving myself plenty of space to do a nice big old turn to get lined up. But same again, I mean, I have it trimmed out and adjusted my speed accordingly, and everything is just smooth as silk right now. There's no issues, and we're you know, well, thankfully that wind came down a little bit as we dropped our altitude, but we'll see what it's like once we turn back in. So we'll go ahead and start our turn onto base here. So I'm just kind of looking at my turn coordinator here, or sorry, just my bank indicator here, and I don't really want to go beyond 20 degrees. Passengers tend not to like that too much. Man, with that sun and this haze, this might be tricky. Can't even see the runway. I'm gonna go ahead and bring in a notch of flaps. There it is. I'm just barely making out with that sun. Whew. Need some glasses. I'm gonna go ahead and start to kill the throttle here. Start to slow us down a little bit. Come back up into this view. Our little, there we go, that's better. A little fast there. Go ahead and introduce the next notch of flaps. I thought I saw the runway, but actually right there. Man, that is tough to see. Go ahead and do third notch of flaps. I have to bring in a little bit more power to correct. I was thinking this was the runway when actually here is the runway. Now we're a little high. Just using the power to really get us to where we need to be. We're on the glide path now. We're with poppy lights. Now we're a little low, but that's okay. I wanted to get down here so I can bleed off some speed. So this is where it gets tricky. I'm gonna go ahead and bring back, and so you're gonna float. Keep it floating. Come to idle, float, 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 and then neutral. No bounce. And now I'm just letting that tail drop naturally. There it goes. And so there's where that wind dipped that one wing down a little bit, and that's where it really messes with you. So I'm glad we got to see that, because that wind was, it's just ever so slightly coming out of our right side, but with my rudder input and me not having that set to correct, it dipped that wing. So it started off great. We didn't have any bounce, but as soon as we had that tail drop and I started to sort of fight it with my rudder, you can see like how much it tilts the plane just by doing that. And if you have too much one way and then that wind grabs that wing, it'll dip it. So still, you know, it was okay. I would give it maybe like a 6 out of 10 as far as a landing, because we did have a nice smooth sort of touchdown, but then it went a little haywire after that. We did stay on the runway though, so that's a great success. Now I'd love to hear from you about your experiences with landing and tips that you might have. I found that leaving the tail wheel unlocked allows me to have a little bit better control, where if I have it locked, as soon as either during takeoff that tail comes up, you've already had too much rudder input, and then when you're landing, same again, you're sort of getting pushed around and you can't control it enough. So I hope that helps show that this aircraft can be flown manually, that it's not something that is quote unquote impossible, or that there is all sorts of bugs with the trim and the elevators and all of that sort of stuff. You can see we flew it just fine. There was not an issue. I get this mouse out of the way there. It keeps on popping up in the center. Oh well. But a really fun plane to fly. Takes practice though. It definitely takes some practice. You can see we had gusts going as well too. If you're looking at this windsock over here, it definitely gusts around a little bit on us. We still have our flaps all the way down. We can go ahead and retract those. But there we are. It was a nice short flight from Santa Barbara to Camarillo. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit about how this aircraft works, how it's sensitive, how practice will always improve your landings, your takeoffs, your settings, your trims, all of that. It needs a little bit of time to get used to how it operates. With that being said, I hope you have many great flights in it. Don't hesitate to ask any questions down below. Please like and subscribe. It does it's going to help me build this channel, so please like, subscribe, comment. All of that helps push this in the silly YouTube algorithm so other people can see my videos and learn how to fly these aircraft. That's it for now. Take care. Have a great evening.